All right, it's a little past time, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So, Dwayne is very excited for class today.
I told Madeline it's going to be the best class you teach all day.
That I teach all day? It probably will be, yeah. Sorry to my small group, but but yeah, exactly. It's not an understatement to say I spent more time on this than I will for what we're going to talk about small group tonight. But that's a future Tyler problem. So, all right. So we have made it through 8 gifts, as we're going to call them. I'll explain that in just a second. And we are ready for the 9th of 10, which is administrator, the passion of management. Dwayne's excited because this might be his. We're gonna find out we're all gonna find out together if this is Dwayne's gift or not, Dwayne's role or not. All right, so here's a quick, I always get one too far. Quick overview of what this class is. Basically, it's all based on practicality. So, and being able to give you a pathway towards being able to be more active in the body, or maybe be, whether you're not active and want to be, whether you're kind of active and want to be more active, or maybe you're not sure if what you're doing is really that fulfilling. Maybe there's a different way that you can be active in the body. So the goal is to stir up action in individuals by using their gifts in unity with the body. When we talk about gifts, so there's, kind of miraculous gifts that it talks about in the New Testament, and this is not talking about that. So this is more, the description is talent plus passion. Maybe a better definition, as I've been working through it in this class, is skill and focus, the combination of that. So kind of what is your skill set? What are you talented at? What are you focused on when looking at others, looking at the body, looking at the church as you're going through life? And I think that focus really determines a lot compared to the skill or the talent, because there are a lot of skill sets that might be overlapping, but then it's kind of what you're focused on as far as what determines what your gift is in this case. We're looking at it through 3 lenses. First of all, by looking at each individual, then how do we help others, and finally the church body as a whole. We have not made it to church body as a whole and helping others in each gift, but that is the plan to do when we're wrapping up the class in June, which it will be wrapped up in June. So we'll look at everything as a whole at that point and look at the church body as a whole. So this gift should be used in love and unity. Aaron asked a great question last week, which was, so how we've been talking about, last week we were talking about service, and he said, how do you show, we talked about serving others in love. What does that mean to you? How do you see that? My answer just off the top of my head was, well, it's serving everyone, no matter if I like them, if I don't like them, kind of treating everyone similarly. And I wouldn't say I pondered on it all week. I did ponder on that question a little bit this week. And I think that the answer I gave is pretty close to, I think, what the answer should be. If we look in Romans chapter 12, so we're going to go through, so in just a minute, I'm going to read 1 through 8. But then if we look starting in verse 9, let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor, not lagging behind in diligent, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. So again, it comes back to the preference thing. So it's pretty clear in some of the letters that the church then, and I would argue that it's just a human thing, that we tend to give preference to certain individuals, or maybe we tend to look down on certain individuals. And maybe the reason why has changed over time, but at the end of the day, we have a tendency to elevate some people or to demote others when we're looking at them. And so if we're doing things in love, then we are using our gift no matter what that person's station is. I would also say that it's coming from the right attitude. So we're going to talk about an immature administrator later on today. And one of the things is that they can become prideful and they can become kind of know-it-alls. And so if you come into a conversation with a I know better than you attitude, that's probably not going to be a loving conversation. So having the right attitude and treating people similarly. I will say that I think that this is pretty accurate in my opinion, just because, so at work there's a lot of changes going on where I work, and it's easy to get into a really negative headspace with all that. And there's also I'm sure everyone deals with some people who are annoying or frustrating to be around, I will say. And so but changing my mindset to treat them the same way. And I've literally had coworkers come up to me and say, why are you helping that person? Why are you giving them the benefit of the doubt? Why are you defending them in this case? I'm like, well, because they're a coworker and I need to treat them the same as I would another coworker, even though really it comes down to, do you love other individuals? I mentioned something about this to Corey yesterday, and he goes, that the phrase that Kevin says really rings true, which is that everyone is worth the life of Jesus. So if you look at another person as they're worth the life of Jesus, it's a lot easier to then love that person. So that was a random soapbox tangent thing on love, but I think we're going to see it as we go through each gift. So when we look at the body, this comes from Romans chapter 12 and 1 Corinthians chapter 12. In our first class, we had a discussion. Man, every time I go one too far. We had a discussion on this, and out of that discussion is the bullet points that we have on the screen, which is all of us have gifts and all of us are expected to use them. All gifts are useful and necessary for the functioning of the body. I should probably change the wording of the unseen gifts might be the most impactful. The unseen gifts are just as impactful, even though you don't see them. So we talk about unseen gifts, we mean like if you're an encourager or you're a server, then you don't necessarily see that person using their gift as often as you would someone who is teaching or someone who is giving a message or someone who is speaking to other people. So speaking versus kind of doing gifts. As we just talked about, be humble in your gift, and then don't be afraid to, on the same token, if you don't think that you're as good in your gift or someone's better or whatever the case is, don't be afraid to continue to use your gift, because all of us have gifts and all of us are expected to use them. So, as I've said before, findmyspiritualgift.com. Apparently there's been some people trying to use a website and it's not that one, and it's come up with some weird different results, so I'll just throw that out there. Find My Spiritual Gift. I think there's one that's called spiritualgifts.com or something like that, but so it's based on a book called Spiritual Giftedness by Doug Hamilton. That's the website. It's just a good starting place that kind of orders, you answer a bunch of questions and it says, here's most likely your gift and here's most likely not your gift. All right. All that being said, let's dig into the gift that we're going to talk about today, which is administrator, the passion of management. So this comes from Romans chapter 12. I'm finding it's best to start in verse 1, and then we'll go through verse 8. So, I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. For through the grace given to me, I say to every man among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. For just as we have many members in one body, and all members do not have the same function, so we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. And since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let each exercise them accordingly. If prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith, if service, in his serving, or he who teaches, in his teaching, or he who exhorts, in his exhortation, he who gives with liberality, he who leads with diligence, and then he who shows mercy with cheerfulness. So we're focused on the he who leads with diligence. According to Doug Hamilton's testing results, which is of the broad population, not necessarily our church population, roughly 10% of people have this gift. So the Greek word that's used in the passage means to put before, to set over, or to rule. The word is also used in 1 Timothy chapter 3 when describing both elders and deacons, and it talks about managing their household. And so manage is another term that you can use in there. So then Doug takes, Kevin thought it was funny that I kept just referring to him as Doug. Doug then takes this word and immediately equates it to administrator with the passion of management or the passion of organization. So we're going to get into all those terms here now. So leadership. If you look at the definition of leadership, it's the ability to guide, influence, and inspire individuals or teams toward a shared goal. Then when we talk about diligence, so diligence is steady, earnest, and energetic effort. Persistent and careful hard work. Zeal is another way it's translated pretty frequently, would be eagerness and enthusiastic interest in pursuit of something. So when I think of diligence, the way that I would define it is the opposite of what it is. So if you're diligent, so the opposite of diligence is someone who is lazy and unengaged. So if you're diligent, you are energetic, you are deliberate about continually, steadily doing something, persistent, you're engaged in what's going on. And so I think it's important, Kevin pointed this out a couple weeks ago when it talked about he who gives mercy with cheerfulness, and said it's probably important that we focus on, not focus, but the reason, being cheerful while giving mercy is probably an important statement to make. So being diligent when you're leading, I would say, is an important thing that we need to look at. So let's dig a little bit further into this. So once again, this lesson series is focused on roles in the church body, referring to them as gifts, so talent and passion, or skill and focus. This is not a discussion on the office of elder or deacon. So even though those offices provide leadership, that's not what we're talking about. This is someone who can provide leadership and not be in that office, though someone who is in that office certainly can have this gift. All right, the administrator, as we're going to refer to it with this gift, and I'll explain that more in just a second, is one who guides those in his or her sphere of influence to a long-term goal through care and diligence. So this is basically just a definition that I made up after really kind of trying to wrap my mind around all these definitions that we're about to go through. So really what it comes down to is they guide individuals towards being the best they can be in the long run, and so with a long-term goal, and that goal being heaven. So guiding people towards heaven. They also guide organizations, and that's probably more frequently where you would see the gift. And so they guide the body towards the goal of heaven by planning and organizing and then executing those plans. So guide is the main word that I kept coming back to with this. And sphere of influence would just be, so if they are, say, in an elder position, then their sphere of influence would be the entire body. And so they're looking at guiding the entire body. But if they're not an elder, it's whatever their sphere of influence. So if they're a deacon, then it's that functional area that they've been given autonomy to lead. Or if they're none of the above, then it's helping individuals. It's helping assist leaders or helping assist the body by talking to the different leaders and helping to provide advice and guidance to them. And we'll get into examples of that probably next week. This is straight out of the book. They embrace a longing to understand the immediate and long-range goals of the work of Christ. They long to chart out a course of direction in search of the safe harbor of heaven at the end of the journey. So this got me back to this week, really. So I think I've said it before, my boss calls it when you can't make a decision on something or you're trying to work through something, calls it spinning because you're just kind of running around in place and not going anywhere. So this is where I spent my time spinning this week, was administration versus management versus leadership. So administration sets the policies and organizational structure of the organization. They're concerned with the rules and they set the framework. Management is more about execution. They set plans and they meet specific objectives. And then leadership, as kind of a broadly defined, a leadership of an organization, is the vision and strategic direction, and they inspire others. So administration would be kind of short-term and task-oriented because they're about setting policies and setting framework and things like that. Management would be medium-term. They're kind of in between the two. And then leadership is looking at the long-term. So all that to say, the person with this gift would be kind of a combination of all three of those areas. So they advise and guide the body and or individuals, which takes the long-term vision of where to go, like leadership, but they're also interested in the policies and the framework, like administration. And they also dive into the nitty-gritty and help to execute the vision like managers would. So the easy question then would be, so why are we calling this administrator and not something else? And the first answer to that is this is what Doug calls it in the book, but I definitely considered changing the name of it and kind of came down to coming all the way back around to keeping the name administrator. Because calling this person a leader instead of an administrator indicates that individuals with this gift should be in a leadership role. So it's like, oh, you're a leader, you're the gift of leadership. And they're not in a leadership role, that could be like, oh, well, what am I doing? Or vice versa, someone who is in a leadership role, and you're like, well, you don't have the gift of leadership. Why are you in this role? So that is absolutely not the intention of this conversation or this class. Therefore, I think that could bring some unintended shame or unintended resentment or problems just by calling it that. So that would be kind of one of the main reasons. Calling it a manager I think would have the same effect. And so, yeah. So really I landed back on administrator. It makes sense to me because, and maybe it's because of where I work. So I work in the College of Agriculture at K-State, and on the administrative side, which administration versus administrative versus administrator, I think all kind of have slightly different meanings. As I'm seeing everyone's eyes glaze over as I'm talking through this. So an administrator makes sense to me because, so like a dean, so they are the head person in the College of Agriculture, or in whatever college that they're in. Here, I'll just get through this and then let Dwayne take a stab at it. So they provide leadership by sharing a vision of the college. They have long-term goals. They literally supervise everyone at some point in the college because all faculty flow up to a department head who flows up to the dean. All staff flow up to a department head who flows up to the dean. So they have the management piece. And then also they are administrative in nature because they set policies, they provide framework of what we are to do. They provide the mission, make sure that we're on track with the mission. So that's where I came back to administrator probably is a good term to continue to use.
I like the way that you described it, except I would say, or the way that you described administration, management, and leadership. I think like leadership leads to management, and management leads to periods of administration. But once you're in that path or whatnot, you'll always be in management or administration just because it's the nature of it. So the way that you described that, I thought that was well done.
Good, thank you.
And one other thing that kind of goes into this too, and it's probably something that all of us who've been leaders at one point or another know, those that are in this role have probably the strongest direct effect on the success of the people who, I don't want to say for whom we're responsible, because that, like you said, does kind of get into the elder's role, but the administrator or the manager or the leader, by the way they do their job, have the strongest influence of all of them over how successful their people are going to be.
Yeah, we're going to talk about how they provide advice and guidance and some examples of that, and yeah, they can really have a strong impact on that.
I'll throw in the contrary opinion.
Oh, I'm surprised.
That calling this administrator confuses stewardship and leadership. The word is literally one who stands before. It's one who goes before, who provides an example. That is exactly the role of an elder, and on a smaller scale, a deacon. Mm-hmm. So this is stewardship, which is different, and they are focused on different things, and we shouldn't confuse those two. When Paul is talking about men who rule their households and their children well, he's not talking about people who administer well. He's talking about people who provide an example, who lead their households toward Christ. Our focus on things like management and administration are largely modern categories that would have been illegible to Paul's readers. Mm-hmm. And it comes from things like we have a building and we have to do things like pay for utilities and keep it up and other things like that. But for the most part, leadership in the church, spoken of as leadership, not stewardship, is talking about leading people. Mm-hmm. It's not talking about setting policies for paying bills and other things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think there's quite a stark distinction that we're not observing there. And Paul's, I don't see any evidence in this or in 1 Corinthians 12 that he is anywhere talking about that specifically.
So you would suggest calling it like a steward instead of an administrator?
This specifically is a steward, but it doesn't follow from this particular verse either. So that would be, sorry, my contrary opinion is you're totally wrong.
But hey, Aaron, but doesn't that go into that care and diligence portion of it when it comes to the people? Because you don't care and have diligence for a building. You might.
I know some people who have more care and diligence for buildings and things. And I mean, even with stewardship, the idea is you are stewarding the things of God on behalf of the people of God and with an eye toward the care of God. But that is not leadership in the same way as this verse is talking about. A steward doesn't have to stand in front of the group. A steward doesn't necessarily lead the way. A steward is making sure that everybody can follow the way, maybe that everybody has what they need to keep up, that nobody's falling behind. But a steward isn't necessarily somebody out there in front leading.
But I agree with you that that's a steward and maybe not an administrator.
A steward is an administrator.
I
Yeah,
would say
some-
it as
some of
two
the
different
examples-
things. I would say it's two different things, because you could be a steward to guide an administrator to provide them expertise in it, but a steward may not have the backbone to take the criticism, the critique, and the admonishment that comes with being the administrator and the fall guy, if you will, for an institution. So I think they're two different things.
That is exactly the role of a steward in the context in which Paul is writing. That is exactly what the steward does in a Greco-Roman household. The steward is the fall guy. Go back to the parable of the unfaithful steward,
Oh, we're going to get there.
and that's exactly what he does. Yeah, but they're two different things, wholly and completely. I'll die on that hill.
Yeah, you can die on the hill if you want. That's fine.
Tyler, I was thinking, as I'm reading through this, and I know you have other slides that'll maybe clarify some things too, but my thought in this so far is I'm wondering, I think I have some of these qualities, but I look at it from the aspect of, in kind of maybe what Aaron was saying, in the household as a mother. And I think most of you know I homeschooled my children. And so you talked about rules and guidelines and then future thinking and spurring them on to their future and things like that. So I know you were talking a lot about in the workplace. That was the workplace for me, was my home, and I can see myself in that. And I feel like there's some crossover in the encouragement. The encourager that I have that falls into the administrator too, and helping spur other people on to things, which I would like to think I tried to do with my children, and maybe with younger women in the church. But I don't know. I threw that out there because as a mother, and that's my workplace, I think there's some crossover there.
So in the book, Doug actually refers to each person as their top two gifts, and really kind of just cuts it off there. And so he actually refers to himself as an evangelist teacher. And so my second highest is actually this. So he would say, like, teacher, administrator. So maybe that's where you come down, because you really fit in with the encourager, and so kind of encourager, administrator. And so you're seeing, and I could be completely wrong on this. You might be seeing then the encouraging side of helping to administer, whereas I would see the analysis side of administrator, and digging in and researching something. So, Fred.
So, going back to this 10% of us have this gift, since saying that elders maybe have the gift of leadership, I are one, and I don't think this is my primary gift.
Which is good.
Which comes back to the question of secondary gifts, maybe, and whether or not that's even a legitimate discussion. But I think all of us, I've been in a number of different administrator leadership roles in my lifetime, and I've always felt uncomfortable with them, but I've dealt with them well enough that nobody ever fired me. But at any rate, I still question whether or not we don't all have to accept the point that we better have some secondary gifts to deal with life well as a Christian.
At the end of the day, I think that all of us should take something away from everything that we're discussing. But see, a couple things. The best leaders are those who don't want it, I would argue, because then they're not looking at it as a power play. And then secondly, if we were to specifically talk about eldership or leadership positions in the church, I think it's really important to have this whole, it'd be great if we had one of each gift, as an elder, because then you have all the perspectives and all the focuses and all the skill sets. If you had an eldership that was fully what we're going to talk about with administrator, I think that you can miss some things, just as a group, as opposed to if you have the different perspectives. Then so I think it's important that elders aren't just this administrator thing, even though the elders are the leaders and are in that leadership position. Mike is
I
talking
think the
about
main goal for your class is service to others, utilizing your gifts.
Yep.
We've got the framework, we've got the rules and regulations in the Word. So we really don't have to worry about administration and the management because we got the framework already. It's up to us to lead, whether it's through being a teacher, being a fellow Christian, and with our brothers and sisters, giving them direction through the Word. That is where the leadership's coming in, and it's being a steward, utilizing a gift. And I think that's the point you're really trying to get across.
Yeah, well, yeah, one of the main points, I would agree. Hans? Sorry, it's Kevin.
No.
I just,
No.
between you two, who knows who had the microphone?
I came in just in time to take Aaron to task and
Oh, wow.
and just give a point counterpoint. I think it's wise. Stewardship is when one gave another stewardship management over finances, vineyards, whatever. That individual in that function now is the administrator in reference to the one who gave him that authority. So it would be both and, not either or. And the gift of stewardship or the gift of administration, if there is a gift of administration, as we talked about the other day, it's just management or vision casting, that the administrator places in one the opportunity to function within that. When there's a need and the Spirit gives the gift to meet that need, it's different than just our natural talent. And that's where I would take issue. But I think that we would have this whole thing is we're helping each other. And the function of that is you are administrating in place of another. That is, he is doing that or she's doing that through you. I say he or she because I grew up in the 70s. So I think that you have this function over role. And that may be part of the definition. Now, like I said, I just came in the middle of what Aaron was saying, and I just had to take him to task because it's just my role to do that. But I think it may help with that definitional point. And to get hung up on the definition and not the function is also an issue because I think as you're pushing, how is the Spirit of God going to gift each one of us as an eye, an ear, a nose, a mouth, a toenail, whatever function you have in the body, that you see what
Hopefully
it is
big
the
toe.
Spirit has given to you and you use it. And some of you have extremely powerful giftedness in administration. Whether you're an elder or not, elders are not administrators, but they function as administrators in some areas, but they are shepherds. They care for the flock. And they're the decision makers. That's so different. They're not the rulers. Peter said that specifically. So an administrator is not a ruler, a passer-downer, but rather a function of giving guidance and leadership, and that would be administration in that sense. And I'm finished because I got lost in my own definition.
Since you came in at the end, I'll forgive you for missing the point. Which is not that stewardship is not a gift, but that stewardship is distinct from leadership, as Paul is talking about it in Romans 12:8. And they're two different concepts. And our tendency now is to conflate administration or stewardship with leadership wholesale. And an elder's secondary gift at best should be this, but their primary gift should probably not be this because their job is not to be an administrator. And so we have different people who do different things, but leadership is not administration. It's not management, it's not stewardship. And that was really the point. But I love you still.
Okay, Hans, and then we need to move on.
Phileo. In all of these 10% of the congregation, 12, however,
Yeah.
21.
Just rough estimate.
But I look at the world in a unsanitized way. So we are able to talk about it, and I'm not saying we're sanitizing this at all. But what I am saying is when the application isn't just in here, because shepherds shepherd the flock, absolutely. But we're also looking for those lost outside of what we would consider to be the flock, and that is where it's very dirty. And that gets on you. And so I agree with everything that's been said. The application for me is more outside as much as it is inside. So when I see this, I don't necessarily conflate things. I just go out and do them. And I think that if you guys ever, if you want to get more experience of how dirty things are, I think we should discuss this absolutely scripturally the way it is, and then we need to apply it, and then go wash yourself, because it gets ugly.
All right. Next bullet point. So, I think the example of leading your family, demonstrates the characteristics of this. So, when you have kids, and so as someone who's been, tries to manage their household well, I'm looking at the long-range goals of my kids. So, what are the goals of my kids? So it would be that they have a relationship with Jesus. It would be that they graduate high school and move out. That might be more a dad answer. Being productive members of society, being good human beings, being responsible adults, all those kind of things. So that is the long-range goal. So those long-term goals don't happen unless you have the short-term goals and the medium-term goals as well. And then diligence also is very important. So, for example, this may have happened this week, when I tell Lily to come inside from playing and she says, okay, fine. And I say, nope, that is not the correct attitude to have. You need to have a better attitude when I ask you to do something, because I am in a authoritative position. I don't say it in these words, but essentially I'm in an authoritative position. When someone in authority asks you to do something, you need to have a better attitude with them. And diligence would be doing that every time it pops up, and not saying, well, I'm tired, whatever. And that's when then kind of issues start to happen, because you're not applying your standards consistently and deliberately, so therefore diligently. And also then having the persistence in doing it every time, and energy to do it every time. So again, you could let it go and not have a tough conversation in the moment, but I know in the long term, I want her to have a better attitude when someone who is older than her and is providing advice or direction to her tells her to do something, that she responds appropriately to it. Obviously, she's 5, so this is a natural thing to happen and that we're working on. But to me, that's a good example of providing that guidance to an individual, in this case, to help them to reach the long-term goals and seeing how things are going. I keep comparing a lot of these roles to different roles in like an organization or in the body itself. So for instance, we talked about how servants are kind of like the maintenance people of a congregation. So at first I was thinking of this as a project manager, which would be more the stewardship, as Aaron was talking about. So I kept thinking of this as a project manager because, so like on a construction site, you're not the owner of the company, you're not running things, but there's someone who's been given authority to build this building. And so they delegate tasks to others, they set goals, they plan, they check in, make sure things are going right, all those things. And I certainly think that people with this gift make good project managers, but I think the project manager definition is probably a little bit too limiting. So I think a better definition is advisor. So again, they're looking at the long term, looking at the plans, and maybe not literal plans, but like seeing the patterns of where things are going, and then providing input or guidance for where we're going, how we're operating, if we're doing so effectively. So again, I kind of already touched on this. Those with this gift would be well suited for a leadership type role, such as a deacon would be a good role for this type of thing, because it's providing all these skill sets for a functional area that they have been given by the eldership, but that is not necessary to have the gift. So again, they have the skill set that would be important to have in leadership, such as long-term vision, strategic planning, things like that, but every elder or deacon or coordinator does not have to have this skill set. And as I said earlier, I would argue we need to have all the gifts represented in our leadership, and it's good to have an administrator, but I would also say it's good to have an encourager, it's good to have a nurturer, it's good to have a teacher, all those things. So, that's that slide. Let's look at some examples. So, again, maybe some of them aren't exactly what this is talking about, but we're drawing characteristics out of each of these examples. So, Exodus chapter 18, verses 13 through 27. And it came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from the morning until the evening. Now, when Moses' father-in-law saw that all he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between someone and his neighbor, and make known the statutes of God and his laws." Moses' father-in-law then said, "These people who are with you," skipped a line. Moses' father-in-law then said to him, "The thing that you are doing is not good. You will surely wear out, both yourself and those people who are with you, because the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me, and I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You be the people's representative before God, and you bring the disputes to God, then admonish them about the statutes and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk and the work they are to do. Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain. And you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that they will bring to you every major matter, but they will judge every minor matter themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will carry the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people also will go to their places in peace." So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, of tens, and they judged the people at all times. They would bring the difficult matter to Moses, but they would judge every minor matter themselves. Then Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, and Jethro went on his way to his own land. So Jethro, which is Moses' father-in-law, comes to him after Moses has just recently led all the people out of Egypt. We haven't even gotten to the 10 Commandments or the 10 words yet. Moses tells him about all that God has done, and Jethro sacrifices to God, and they all eat together. And the next day, Moses goes out to judge the people. So in this case, he's sitting down, he's hearing all the issues they have, he's providing solutions, he's providing judgment. Here's what God says about this. Jethro sees this and immediately can see it's placing too great a burden on Moses. He sees this plan has major flaws. He can see the long-term vision and knows this is unsustainable for Moses, and also it's not really that efficient anyway to have everything coming down to one person, a bottleneck, I guess, if you will. He then provides a better plan where Moses appoints elders and trains them up and delegates responsibility to them, and then only the most difficult cases arrive at Moses' feet. So this is a significantly better plan, and Moses listens to his father-in-law. So this, it provides some characteristics that we're looking at when we're looking at what an administrator is. So long-term vision, seeing the flaws in a plan, providing a quality plan that's maybe different, getting buy-in, and ultimately providing sound advice. Next, Acts chapter 5. I only put 5. Acts chapter 5, verses 34 through 40. Before we read this passage, this will probably be the last passage we get to, and then we'll close for the day. The background is that the Jewish leaders threw the apostles in prison, but an angel opens the prison gate and the apostles walk out. So the Jewish leaders interrogate the apostles, but the apostles hold firm. They refuse to give in to the demands, which is to stop teaching about Jesus. And the Jewish leaders want them executed, and that's where this passage picks up. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, respected by all the people, stood up in the council and gave orders to put the men outside for a short time. And he said to them, "Men of Israel, be careful as to what you're about to do with these men. For some time ago, Theudas appeared, claiming to be somebody, and a group of about 400 men joined him. But he was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After this man, Judas of Galilee appeared in the days of the census and drew away some people after him. He also perished, and all those who followed him were scattered. And so in the present case, I say to you, stay away from these men and leave them alone. For if the source of this plan or movement is men, it will be overthrown. But if the source is God, you will not be able to overthrow them, or else you may even be found fighting against God. So they followed his advice, and after calling the apostles in, they flogged them and ordered them not to speak the name of Jesus and released them. So Gamaliel saw the flaw in the plan of the leaders. He recognized false prophets end up perishing anyway because they don't have God behind them. So he had the experience. He was paying attention to patterns, paying attention to details, and that would inform him of how this is going to play out in the future. So one in which fighting against a real prophet won't turn out well for you, but fighting against a false prophet in the long run is kind of futile because, again, they're going to perish away anyway. So he was able to give sound advice to the Jewish leaders and evidence in such a way as to convince leadership that the new way is better. So he got buy-in and everyone followed his advice. So that is where we're going to wrap up today. We have like 2 minutes left, and the next passage we have is also a long one. So any last word before we dismiss? All right. Very good class. Oh, thank you. All right, thank you everyone for your time, and we'll see you to continue on this discussion next week.